Good evening. I'd like to call our meeting to order, if I may. Welcome to the Monday, September 21st regular meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We're going to have a regular meeting, the first half of this meeting, then we're going to have a work session, the second half of the meeting. And that's because last Monday was a religious holiday, and we wanted to respect that, and so we canceled the meeting last Monday, a Jewish holiday. And so that's the order of things tonight, but we'll stay here for the whole time. So if you're welcome to sit for just the regular meeting or the work session, whatever you want to do. If you would, though, please rise now for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, Madam Clerk, will you call the roll call vote, please? Or the roll call?
Yes, sir. Mr. Baruch? Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Oliver?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mr. Z? And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have a motion to adopt the meeting agenda?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. It appears we have an oath of office to administer tonight. Is that right?
Yes.
Grace Starboard is being sworn into the Fairfax Area Commission on Aging.
Great. Well, are you here this evening? Please come forward. Thank you for serving our community. Welcome. Come on over to the clerk.
Right here. So, I, Grace Paris Starboard,
Grace Paris Starboard,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia,
and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia,
and that I will faithfully and impartially
and that I will faithfully and impartially
discharge and perform
all
the duties incumbent upon me
the duties incumbent upon me
as a member of
as a member of
the Fairfax Area Commission on Aging,
the Fairfax Area Commission on Aging,
according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
according to the best of my abilities, so help me God.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Why don't you come forward and we can give you our hearty thanks. Thank you again. We appreciate your service and your willingness to be on this committee. Thank you. So we're going to go on now, move on to public comment. I have 3 speaker slips. If there's anyone else who hasn't submitted a speaker slip at this time, wishes to speak, we'd be delighted to hear from you, but just go ahead and fill out one of these green cards and hand it to the clerk. If you could, keep your comments to 3 minutes. State your name and address for us as well. So we'll start with David Tax. Mr. Tax, welcome, followed by Mr. Wong. You'll be the second speaker. Welcome.
Mike's Deli. Thanks, Cindy. I own with my sister Rebecca Mike's Deli, Lazy Sunday, Clarendon's Beach Shack here in the Little City. And usually I do my public speaking in front of parties of 4 or 5, so I have paper. I'm here tonight to make you aware of a couple upcoming events. On Thursday, October 1st, my wife is holding her annual Arlington Free Clinic fundraiser. And the Arlington Free Clinic is one of the most well-run and highly regarded clinics in the nation, and in the area, of course. They provide expert health care for people who are low or no income without any insurance, and they do this all by using money raised by these fundraisers and doctors and nurses that donate their time. Then on Sunday, November 8th, the Sunday before Veterans Day, we're having our Decorate a Vet fundraiser. This foundation is a foundation that I started with Steve Sisler and Jeff Jones and Mo Jafari. And in this foundation, we identify elderly or disabled veterans in the Falls Church area, usually like 7 families per year. And we go to their houses with a team of volunteers for a week and do whatever it is needed to make their lives better. This includes installing ramps, handrails, shutters, gutters, fences, taking down trees, putting up trees, driveways, walkways, general cleaning, and beautifying. And of course, it culminates in decorating their house for the holidays. Our philosophy is and always will be to use our business to help our community. We care about and are very loyal to the little city. We try to lead by example, that if everybody does just a little bit, then it goes an awful long way. So I hope you all will be able to attend at least one of these functions to help us out. That's Thursday, October 1st and Sunday, November 8th. They're both on our website. And I bet you didn't think that's what I was going to talk about tonight. So if you all have any questions about this event or anything else, feel free to ask me now, or you can go ahead and email me either way. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and thank you for your service to the community. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Mr. Wong, Victor Wong, followed by Ms. Winters. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. This is Victor Wong, 914 Park Avenue. This is a totally different subject most people expect me to talk about, but this is a subject I just read about, was that the school system is using the bond funds to pay for studies. Leads to question is like, if we use all our bond funds for our studies, does that mean we now have to appropriate more funds to build the school? So usually when people plan for a big expenditure, they plan for it in their budget and then take out the loan to build it. But if we use it all our funds up front, how are we going to pay for it later down the line? This would be an analogy of my son who's in high school. Let's take out a loan to go visit colleges. And then he doesn't go to college. Now I have loan payments associated with college, but he's not going to college. So I just want the council to be aware of it, and I think they might want to consider putting a moratorium on uses of funds from the bond that we're paying interest on from the school system to do studies or run studies with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Winters?
Good evening, Rohini Winters, 324 Grove Avenue. And I just wanted to ask the council in your deliberations on Mason Row, if you would consider making the public aware of the latest version of the voluntary concessions that are under review, contemplation, discussion, maybe in your later work session today. The only version that I've seen with submission 6 is the one that the applicant mentioned was changed at the last work session, where they took out the maximum $350,000 cap on offsite improvements. They also talked about the discussions there that are still ongoing with the Housing Commission on the ADUs, and they referenced that the subsidy or the tax on amusement uses was still in negotiation with the city, and I don't feel that the citizens have had any opportunity to understand what that proffer concession is. I would also ask that the City Council ask for greater impact fees for schools, recs and parks, and public safety infrastructure. As I imagine with the growing number of apartment units, any residential units in the city, that eventually we're going to need another fire response unit to be able to meet our expectations of response times. If it's not city volunteer fire department, then I imagine we'll have to increase our reciprocal agreements with Arlington or Fairfax County Fire. And I haven't heard that in discussion, although Council Member Karen Oliver did ask if there were any other impacts that were not noted between the difference of the school populations. I don't think it's been very well and thoroughly fleshed out for the total number of increased residential cumulatively with all the projects that are being brought online. And finally, with regard to Mason Row, I would like the city to once and for all ask the developer not to build 6 stories across the board, and instead of 340 units, ask them to build 272 apartment units on 4 stories above ground retail instead of 5, and that would soften the impact, the massing, and the population growth in the city. I appreciated the letter to the editor from Mr. Meislick regarding the architecture and artistic component of the Hilton or any other building that we might build at Mason Row or elsewhere in the city. And as I've asked before, a landmark entrance to the West End would be wonderful and welcomed. And I would second his comment that if you would like to get your picture taken in front of it, then that would be the mark of a place to go and a beautiful structure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who wishes to address council at this time? If so, you should submit a speaker slip. You can also speak when a matter of interest to you is called. So seeing there are no other speakers, we'll move on. And let me just ask Mr. Shields, do you have any response or information back to some of the comments you heard tonight?
First, with the request for information about dollars spent on studies using the bond proceeds, what my understanding of the funds are being used for is to move the application through the county approval process, and there are some technical things that need to be done with that, but I'm not aware of any studies, but we will inquire just to confirm that, and we can provide that information to the City Council. And second, with respect to the voluntary concessions, we haven't received an updated version of the voluntary concessions. We have the council meeting in which there was discussion of the VCs, and so the developer has the benefit of that. And then in our discussions, we've made suggestions on how the voluntary concessions can be improved, but we have not yet gotten a formal response. As soon as we do get that formal response, then we will post that and make that available to the boards and commissions and to the public.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baruch.
Thank you. And Ms. Conley was just kind enough to let me know where the status is of the application that's pending before the Fairfax Planning Commission as far as Mount Daniel goes. So, Mr. Shields, you might want to provide the council and the public to the extent that you know an update on that, and keep us apprised of that as well.
The Planning Commission, the Fairfax County Planning Commission, will take up the Mount Daniel land use application, the 2232 application, in early November, and that was an action that was taken by the Planning Commission on the 17th of September at their meeting.
Just to follow up on that, did they provide any further input of why they wanted to move that to the November date? Can you provide us?
Well, they had asked questions about traffic flow and for other traffic impact studies and things of that nature, and so the school board asked for additional time to respond to the Planning Commission's questions, and so in light of that request, I think that's the reason behind the deferral.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I was going to go to written comments and then go, but if you want, we can. All right, well, why don't we go ahead then to written comments. Madam Clerk, do you have any written comments you'd like to share with us?
Yes, we had some comments before the September 21 meeting that was rescheduled for tonight. We had the following wrote in favor of the Mason Row project: Mr. Paul Barkley, 211 Chestnut Street; Candace DeMatteis; Todd Fine of 6942 Spruce Street; Seema Mahaney and Louis Simonin. And the following wrote in opposition to the Mason Row project: Elizabeth Bass of 322 Grove Avenue, Sharon Chase, Bob Dean of 2352 Greenwich Street, Kay Hankala, Terry McWhinney of Dunbar Lane, and Sandra Quillen. The following urged the council to send Mason Row back to first reading, and that was Linda and Roger Neighborgall of 1005 Hillwood Avenue, Sajila Ramsey, and Dale Walton of 205 Southwest Street, Ron Brousseau of 607 Northwest Street wrote to oppose the Mason Road project until the voluntary concessions comply with the minimum requirements for ADUs in the city affordable housing policy. Jay Grantham was in favor of development, but asked City Council to include Highland Avenue in the traffic analyses for the Mason Row and George Mason High School projects. And Rohini Winters of 324 Grove Avenue submitted 2 letters outlining her concerns about the Mason Row project. And then this week, before this meeting, we had a number of parishioners from St. James Church Road expressing concern about a proposal for parking on Park Avenue and a change to Spring Street. Oops. There were quite a few. We had Mike and Susan Bayer of 2403 Claremont Drive, Michael Dickey, Abby Gallivan, Richard Hunter, 508 Timber Lane, Melissa Kirk, Robert Klein, David Nasser of 415 East Broad Street, Trang Wen, Elizabeth Patera of 912 Park Avenue, Carlos and Mary Jean Salinas, Diane Sorosky, Bridget E. Tomball, Scott Wanek, and John Yun. And finally, the Environmental Service Council wrote to urge the City Council to devote staff resources to address climate change and energy efficiency issues and to reestablish the city's climate task force with the goal of significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions from city government operations and the broader city community.
Okay, thank you. Now why don't we go on to council requests? Ms. Connolly, do you have something you wanted to speak to?
Mr. Shields, this is in response to Ms. Winters' question and something that I've been wondering as well. And that is, what are the best practices in cities for the number of police officers per population and the number of fire trucks and available first responders? And are we below that limit? And when's the point where we get above that limit? I just think that's something that has come up a few times, and it would be nice to know if we have more than we need right now, so expanding our population wouldn't affect them as much, or when we will have to hire more. And there have to be industry best practices out there.
That's an important question, and it's a big question, and it's not a simple question to answer. In some respects, vertical construction does have different types of challenges than more low-density development, and so I don't think there's a real one-size-fits-all response to that, but we can have more discussion with the City Council about that. And there's 2 different components to it. From the public safety perspective, the chief and I are having discussions about our police staffing levels right now with and that is driven partly just because we have a number of our police officers who are out for either because of injuries or for other reasons, and so we have a lot of staffing challenges like right now. But it has prompted us to think into the future, and the council has had this discussion with each budget about our staffing levels, the reason why it is, and what our challenges are going forward. So I'd like to maybe continue that discussion with the chief. With respect to fire, because of our contractual relationship with Arlington, I believe we have access really to the whole region's fire support, fire suppression support, and emergency health services. And I believe the city, through that contract, is very well served and can manage growth very ably with that resource.
Thank you.
Mr. Brugge?
So I want to piggyback off some of the questions that Ms. Conley had and some of the comments that I had made before. This goes to the comment that I had made about residential units in our commercial core area, especially when it comes to vertical policing and fire. And our absorption capacity goes specifically to these points that at some point you're going to need additional police officers that are specifically trained for vertical policing as opposed to perhaps cruisers or bicycles or whatever the mode may be of looking at neighborhoods when you're dealing with apartment complexes or condominiums that are vertical. Obviously, it raises a whole different set of challenges. And Mr. Shields, with all due respect, I know that you and the chief are looking at this, but we're going to see a pretty quick increase in number of units coming online almost at the same time with two buildings that are going to be occupied sometime in 2016 or 17. And you layer on top of that how long it takes police officers to go through the capacity, or I'm sorry, through training, through the academy and get hired, go through clearances. So I don't want to sound alarmist on this, so I'm not going to, but we need to sort of get those budget numbers front and center now. And I think the council needs those numbers and the public needs to have realizations of what those are before we make decisions on other projects. So I don't think that this can wait. Several council members, including myself, have been talking about this issue sort of very slowly and deliberately. I know that I, for one, have asked for a number of years, how many units can we take on? And part of that is the public safety aspects. And I'm not going to be here, on this council next year when a lot of the projects are going to be probably debated and coming online. But I'd be remiss to say, I want to leave the council, at least for now, without thinking through the public safety issues. And I'm sure Vice Mayor Snyder is going to be taking up the forefront on those, and he may have some comments along the same lines. But I'd like to see those numbers sooner than later, and perhaps begin to figure out how that's going to feed into the budget deliberations, because I think that's one of our core missions is public safety issues. And as far as fire, I know that we've got the interjurisdictional agreements, but I know that we just recently went through the negotiations of that process. So it might be a little bit more involved than I think in the 30-second snapshot that we got tonight. I hate to find out a few years from now we may need a new ladder truck to provide the vertical fire protection and suppressions that we may need. Thank you.
One thing I would just add, we think about these with every development that we have, and so this isn't a new thought process or a new planning process. With our fiscal impact model, it's not an abstract exercise. That model takes our own budget data and then applies it to new development, and on a marginal cost basis then projects what the new cost will be for public safety or for rec and parks and for these types of things. And so as new development comes online, we should all anticipate that we'll have those discussions about the changes we'll need to make to our operations to be able to handle them appropriately. And that's not new for us either. The year 2008 was the year that the Spectrum, the Byron, and Pearson Square all came online and got their certificates of occupancy the same year. And so we've had years in which we've had enormous changes in our, in terms of our density all happen at short periods of time. That also happened at a time when we were going into the recession and we were actually reducing staffing levels at the same time that those developments were being completed. And so I think as we go forward, we should all anticipate that we'll have those service level discussions. With the new development, we have revenues that come with them, and the council ultimately will be deciding on how to allocate those, and I will be providing recommendations on that.
Just on that model, and I don't want to necessarily debate the model, but we're also sort of reaching some capacity issues, which I'm driving at, and this not just goes for public safety, it goes for schools. And again, I don't want to have a whole drag-out debate about the model, but the model only captures a snapshot, does have some things factored in, like potential public safety, school cap, et cetera, costs associated with it. But at a certain point, I think this gets to the questions earlier, you're going to need training new officers to go through the academy, possible facility issues, and this goes to parks, recs, everything that we've talked about before. So those are the issues that I think we need to think through. And also, as I mentioned at the last work session, I'll repeat again, we can't keep double tripping the money, because the notion is some of these projects are going to pay for the capital down the road. Mm-hmm. But if we're talking about where we've been historically, we're at the highest some of the highest tax rates we've seen recently, certainly as long as I've been on the council and maybe as long as Vice Mayor Snyder's been on the council. So if the notion is we're going to reduce taxes as a result of these projects, that might be a rude awakening when we start looking at some of the public service expenditures that are going to have to go along with it, because you can't double trip that money. It's got to go for one or the other. You can't have lower taxes, have great parks, have great facilities, and do it all. Just the math does not add up. So, and I don't want to necessarily get into that debate, but, you know, we're going to have to see it. Well,
how many times are we going to not get into that debate?
Well, we can get into it whenever you want. I mean, we can get into it now during the work session or whenever, but I've been asking for these numbers, and it came up again tonight. We've had the public ask for it. We've had council members ask for it. So I'm happy to have the debate whenever.
Okay, why don't we not have it tonight? Why don't we go ahead and, the request has been made to the city manager to get information to council and to the public, which is great. Let Mr. Shields, you go ahead and work on that, and hopefully you can promptly give us information in the near future, maybe at a work session, we can have some further discussion about it. And unless there's other comments, why don't we move on to business in the agenda? I guess, Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some additional issues not to debate tonight. First of all, I think all of us have been reading the comments from St. James parishioners, and we want folks to know that, in fact, we've read them very carefully. And I'll ask an issue we won't debate tonight, perhaps, but I would like more justification for the approach that's being taken here. Recognizing, as I do, that I live in a neighborhood where there's a major church, and so I have sympathy for the neighborhood. But I also realize that St. James is one of the institutions that is a landmark in our city. So I want to make sure that we're finding the best approach to meet the contending claims that we have here. So I'd like a review of that. Secondly, with regard to Mason Row, it's not entirely clear to me what the role of the council here is. I don't want us to be in a position where we're faced with a second reading vote when we have not had an opportunity to get our particular questions and issues out, discussed, and if there's any direction that we want to give to the developers, that's got to happen in this interim period. It should not wait until the night we have a second reading. That's not, in my view, good government.
It's not going to.
So I think some process like that would be very helpful. Next, on public safety, I would ask that at the Council of Governments, there was, I attended the Public Safety Commission meeting, and there were 4 issues discussed. The first of all, the 21st century policing recommendations for the Presidential Commission, the use of body cameras by police, recent gang activity in the region, and prison populations. And I'm wondering if we can have some discussion of any potential issues there on behalf of the city in the future. Those are all terribly important issues, and I know we've got a fair amount of success in some of those areas, and I just want to keep it up. Finally, the fiscal model has come up. I think it's time to take a serious look at it to make sure it's really capturing all the costs of the development projects, and I think it's entirely relevant as we look at Mason Row and as we look at other development projects. It's possible that it captures everything. It's also possible that we're missing some things, and I would say that the circumstances are different from the last time we had major apartment units come on board, because we've got all those now, and now we're adding more. So the question is, are we capturing all the costs, direct and indirect, that we ought to be capturing in that model? And perhaps it's time for a third-party review of the model to make sure that it's really up to date, because again, we have serious decisions to make. One of them clearly is Mason Row. We've also got the potentially the Weston Broad. Well, that's the Weston Broad, but potentially the Broad in Washington, and all the sites and the site around the George Mason High School. So all those argue for the latest, absolutely most precise model that we can have to capture all the direct and indirect costs. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments, or should we move on?
Just one, please.
Okay.
The meeting that was held last week with the community about the markings on Southwest Street that will be put down once the reconstruction project is done. It was a very good meeting. It was very well attended. Staff handled it well, I thought. Just wondering I probably would want to do a report back as I'm visiting with folks. Do we have a kind of a timetable for when we're going to make a decision on the various options that were presented? Is that going to happen before the reconstruction is finished, or are we going to wait till after it's finished and let folks know then?
I need to follow up on that. I went to a very short part of that meeting.
Yeah, I saw you there briefly.
And I wasn't there at the end, so I don't know exactly what was communicated at the end as to what the next steps were going to be. But
okay.
So let me get that communication out and make sure that it's also getting out to the community so the community knows what the next steps are going to be. But I think that the reaction I've heard is that it was a really good discussion, and that there was a consensus that seemed very apparent as the meeting went through in terms of what the desire was, which was to keep the parking that is there now, not have dedicated bike lanes, and potentially have sharrows, but I think there was a little bit more ambivalence about that. That was the feedback that I'm told that we got at that meeting, but let me circle back with staff and then talk about what our communication will be on the next step.
I think that's a good summation of what I heard too, and there were a good cross-section, I think, of folks who were there, including a fellow who's been cycling, he said, for 27 years downtown to work, that's a lot of miles by bike.
And one other thing I would add is that there was also discussion of the pedestrian crossings.
Yes.
And that there were ped crossings laid out on the plan, and there was support for those.
Yeah, if I'd add anything to what you said, it's just that, the broader discussion of pedestrian safety particularly at West and Ellison at the entrance to the neighborhood, and at the other end at the county side entrance, pedestrian crosswalks and so forth. That was not really the purpose of the meeting, but we did have a good bit of discussion about that. Finally and quickly, is Ms. Mester here? Yes. The project at, the project at Parker and Kent, I understand there was a meeting with some of the neighbors about that. Could you just give us a little update on what the progress is going to be on the construction there?
Certainly, yeah. We did have a rescheduled community meeting when the weather looked like it was going to cancel the first one. It was held last week. There were 3 households, residents in attendance, favorably received that the project was proceeding, and they were actually starting construction today.
Oh, today. Missed it. Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Why don't we go on to the report of the county or the city manager, Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Just a few things to report. We did have a very busy weekend in the city this past weekend, and just a word of thanks to all those who came and all who participated. Amy Maltese is our staff member who coordinates all of our planning and preparation for that, along with the police and public works and the sheriff and the volunteer fire department. Also want to thank all of our restaurants who came for the Taste of Falls Church. We know that it's a big effort on the part of the restaurants, and it really contributes a great deal to the whole event, and we had great turnout. We also took the opportunity on Saturday to publicly celebrate our designation as a certified community wildlife habitat, which refers to all the work that individual homeowners have done, 139 of them, as well as the city, to take land, backyards or school spaces or park spaces, and very consciously try to make them places where wildlife can thrive. And so we were recognized. We were one of 8 communities in Virginia that were so recognized, and we celebrated that. And much of the council was there, and I know that you all want to speak to that as well. On the same theme of environmental programs, the city has submitted its paperwork for the EPA Green Power Partnership for 2014, and just a few facts from that report. The threshold is that from the city's operations, at least 10% of our power consumption needs to be from renewable sources if we're to qualify for the partnership. Our numbers for 2014 are at 13.6% of our electricity and is from renewable sources through Dominion. And then citywide, 3% of all power consumption within the city limits needs to be from renewable sources, and we increased slightly to 4.73%. So we're moving in the right direction. We have more to go, but I do want to thank our city intern, Kate Walker, who put this data together to get it into to the EPA so that we could continue our partnership with them. And Kate is an extraordinary intern. She's actually very accomplished in the realms of science and policy and regulation. She was pursuing her master's degree through Virginia Tech and came to do her tree inventory and canopy study through the city arborist office, and she's completed that work. She did this as well. And we're trying to find ways to keep her here in the city and keep up the good work. But I just wanted to acknowledge those recent accomplishments.
Thank you very much. Unless there's anything else, why don't we move on to business on the agenda? Madam Clerk, do you want to call the first item?
It looks like our first item is consent items.
Okay, Mr. Shields.
A contract with the Fairfax County Department of Family Services and the Fairfax County Office to Prevent and End Homelessness and the Fairfax County Department of Administration for Human Services. We've had a contractual relationship with the county for these services for many decades, and the changes to the agreement are pretty simple. One, it just establishes the methodology by which we calculate our population, and that's how we pay on a population basis. It extends the term of the agreement to the year 2025, and it stipulates that funding is subject to annual appropriation by the City Council. So those are really the three changes to this very long-standing agreement with the county.
Thank you. Is there any member of the public that wishes to address this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Is there any council questions about this item? No?
Just one comment.
Sure.
Mr. Shields, I don't think this particular item is going to a federal agency, but just a reminder, if there's any reports that accompany it, my name should not be going to any federal agency or federal court. And that also goes for the grant that you reported on to the EPA as well. Just a reminder.
Okay, are there any council, Ms. Conley?
On page 3, letter D, the last line says the fixed fee has been set since fiscal year 1991 and will remain level through fiscal year 2012. Does that need to say 2020 or 2025?
2019?
Right.
2024?
I think that's the old agreement, and so that's there as a reference point for you. And the new agreement will update that.
Okay, so it's okay for that line to remain the same?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, unless we have any other comments, do we want to make a motion? Someone?
Mr. Mayor, I move to authorize the city manager on behalf of the city to sign the proposed amendment to the current agreement with Fairfax County Department of Family Services, Fairfax County Office to Prevent and End Homelessness, and Fairfax County Department of Administration for Human Services, and the City of Falls Church Housing and Human Services.
Second.
Did you get someone for the second? Okay, why don't you call the roll call vote, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Baruch?
Yes.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
And the motion carries.
Great. Okay, why don't we move on to the next item? And it looks like the next item, were there any council, looks like we made council member comments. Are there any additional comments? Okay.
Just wanted to thank Parks and Rec specifically and Public Safety for their outstanding work at the Taste of Falls Church and the Fall Festival. It was a great event, lots of fun, and thanks to all of our restaurants, both in the city and outside the city, that participated. It was a great event. I'm still recovering. I was one of the judges, and I think the other judges are recovering in a good way. So that was definitely a highlight of the year for me. I love doing that event, and I was honored to be one of the judges again. And it went off without a hitch. My only complaint, if I had one, is I needed more time. trying to make it through all the restaurants in that limited time was difficult, but it was a lot of fun. And I got to say to our restaurants, they really they rock it pretty well. I mean, it was outstanding, the amount of effort and time and energy that our businesses put into that. So big shout out to them.
Okay, other council member, Mr. Duncan?
Just wanted to note the Parks and Rec folks announced, right, that the grand reopening of the West End Park is going to be on Columbus Day weekend, I think, on October the 11th, Sunday. Invite the community to come to that. I happened to be over that way and took a walk through the park. This is really spectacular. It's just tremendous to see what the new facility is. There was a kid there working on the skateboard feature, and then the rest of the park is just terrific looking with the new sign entrance and everything. It's great. So invite everybody to come to that.
Okay, other comments? Ms. Connolly?
I just want to call attention to 3 other things that city staff have been doing, and that is, if those of you that get Focus on Falls Church newsletter, the communications department has added a little section about council news, and so when citizens get the Focus on Falls Church, they can look and see council meetings and find information about what city council is doing. And because we have so many engaged citizens, I think that's a nice way for people to be able to keep informed of what council is officially deciding and be able to see videos much more easily. And then our clerk has added to her response to people when they send submissions into the city, and all these letters, they get a response that says, we urge you to sign up for Focus on Falls Church newsletter. So I just want to congratulate them on thinking their way around the best way to continuing to keep the community informed about what council is doing and what may affect their lives. So that's one. And the housing department is going to be doing the ADU lottery at the end of October. There's going to be a press release going out, and that is going to be sometime in early October, and the lottery is going to be at the end of October. And those are for the affordable dwelling units in the Broad and, what's it called? West Broad residences above Harris Teeter. So, and I believe there are 18 residences available. So anyone who's interested in applying for those, look for that announcement or check in with the housing department.
Did you have 2 or 3
Oh,
things?
and then my last thing is the other park that looks great is the Howard Herman Park, because the bridge has opened up, and it's great. It's such a nice, it's such a nice bridge and a brand new way to walk around town. So congratulations to Public Works on getting that together too.
Okay, and I guess lastly, the Run for the Schools was Sunday morning, a great success. Phil, I guess you won again this year, which is great news for all of us.
Actually, I got a picture of you winning, and I want to send that to you after the meeting.
Okay, it was a great event, so our thanks to all the folks who put that on and the money raised for the schools. So are there any other comments? We should move on to the last item on our agenda today, which is our approval of the minutes, at least on the regular portion of the agenda. So are there any comments to the minutes from April 27th, 2015? Okay.
So full of chatter tonight. All right, so Celeste, on these comments from the public, a lot of people are were urging for a 1% tax rate increase. Do you think they really meant a 1 cent tax rate increase, or did they?
I did check that because Veronica caught that as well, but they did say 1%, so I didn't want to read into what they were saying. I can triple check though, if you would like.
If you checked already, that makes sense.
We did have a
Just
discussion
as I read it,
about
I thought,
that.
that's a funny way to say it, but if that's how people put it in their emails, then I guess leave it that way.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other comments, corrections to the meeting minutes? If not, do we want to go ahead and?
Just noticed on line 783, Ms. Connolly, in her new role as chair of the Budget Committee, canceled the meeting in the 22nd century, 2105. I think it's 2015.
You probably wouldn't be there anyway. Okay, are there any other comments to these meeting minutes, or should we go ahead and take a vote on them and move on with our business tonight?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the minutes of the meeting of April 27th, 2015.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Okay, so our next, we're going to move to a work session But why don't we take a 5-minute break so that staff can set things up for us to the extent that needs to happen. You all are welcome to sit and stay here for the rest of the meeting. The public comment period is limited to regular meetings, so there won't be any public comment during the work session, but you're welcome to sit and observe. We're delighted to have you here, but we'll take a short break and then get started with the work session portion of tonight's meeting. Thank you.
I did. So that's the one we have keyed up. And so
And Mr. Duncan. Thank you. Thank you all for sticking around for our work session portion of tonight's meeting. I think we're all back up at the dais. Mr. Shields, would you like to get started?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. We tonight have the chairman of the Economic Development Authority, Mike Novotny, is going to present conceptual plans that the EDA has commissioned for improvements to the park that is located in downtown Falls Church, right between the Hunan Cafe and the new restaurant where Peel and Thai used to be, which is now a seafood restaurant. And that park, as the council will recall from the downtown area plan, and we took a walking tour, and we really identified this park as an area that could contribute much more to the downtown commercial aesthetic, and it could be used more usefully than it's currently being used. And the EDA took the initiative to fund a study and put together some plans for what this park could be in the future. And so tonight's an opportunity to take a look at what the EDA's work on this site has been, and then after that we can have some discussion about next steps and where we would go from here. But first, let's turn it over to Mr. Novotny for the presentation, and we look forward to seeing it.
Thank you, Wyatt. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. I'm actually coming back to talk about this topic for the second time. Some of you may recall we talked about it in January, so I do appreciate you having me back. I'll go through a presentation. I tried to abbreviate what we went through last time in January and also add in some additional information between then and today. But just real quickly, the presentation outline, I'll take about 10 to 15 minutes to go through this, and then I'm available for questions and discussion. But I'd like to talk first about the timeline of events so far, go through very quickly the existing site itself, just to orient everybody, talk about the concept designs that were previously presented, and then show you the preliminary pricing that we got back in the interim, and then talk about next steps. So the timeline really goes back about a year from now. The EDA did its annual retreat and last summer, and part of that retreat was visiting various sites in the city that were undergoing redevelopment, talked about for redevelopment, or in this case, it was this small area right on the 100 block of Broad Street, in between, at the time, Peel and Thai and Hunan Cafe. And it's a piece of city-owned property, the majority of it is, and we just felt like it was really underutilized. And it was, in a sense, we talked about it as low-hanging fruit for the city, given its real strategic location and a minimal amount of effort to turn this into a really, really dynamic place for the public. So fast forward to November 2014, the EDA engaged Olin Studio. It's really a world-renowned landscape architect firm. Probably their highest profile project that they've designed is Bryant Park in New York City. Many of you may be familiar with it. They've done a lot of work in this area more recently, and I've had some professional experience with them. They're just an excellent group, first class, and brought a lot of good ideas to the table. In January, we had them into a regular EDA meeting, and they presented their concepts. And those concepts, I think, were received very favorably, and I would say that it received broad support in general from everybody attending the meeting. It was one of our higher attended meetings, too. There seemed to be an awful lot of interest around it. I mentioned in January also we had this the EDA City Council joint work session where these designs were originally presented to you all. And in February and March, we commissioned pricing of the designs. These are preliminary conceptual pricing budgets that we received back. That came out of the discussion that we had in January with the City Council. And then finally, I'll mention in April, after receiving the pricing back, having some more discussion, the EDA passed a motion that they would be willing, the EDA would be willing to pay for 50% of the total cost up to $250,000 to actually build the park. And the idea is that money would come out of the land fund that we currently have. And to skip to the punchline, the total budget we're estimating is about $500,000. So let me step back real quick just for orientation. The property itself, again, it's this parcel in between Hunan Cafe, there's Dogwood Tavern, CVS to the left, and what it used to be Pilon Thai, now Hot and Juicy Crawfish to the right. It's a small park-like area, though it's not usable, and it's also some parking behind it. The area plan for this this sector, you see the pink dashed line shows the area in question, and essentially in our comp plan, it's already calling for it to become a park. A few pictures of the site itself. This is taken from Broad Street, looking back towards the area. You can see, as it exists today, you have these small walls that kind of basically create this this moat, if you will, where you really don't pass. So all the area in between is very much unusable, but for this little path to get to the parking lot in the middle. Here's another shot looking at the other direction. There's that path going through the middle. There is a little bit of slope to this site. It's a gentle slope. Here you have a transformer that's in the middle, unfortunately located right there, and then there's some additional parking beyond. And then the alleyway to the left. The alleyway is not city-owned. Everything in these pictures are city-owned except for that alleyway that is owned by Mr. Oshinsky, the adjacent landowner.
I'm sorry, how about the sidewalk there?
I'm not sure if the sidewalk is city-owned or not. I'm going to venture a guess and say it is, but I'd have to double-check. And maybe staff would know the answer to that.
Yeah, well, I'm not entirely sure what the dimensions of the alleyway are.
The best surveys that we had showed about a, I want to say a 15-foot strip of land.
The alleyway?
That's the alleyway. That's essentially curb. I would guess that that's curb to wall. That's part of the adjacent land. So here's a shot in plan view that shows, again, the pink dashed line, the area that we really studied, or we had Olin Studios study for a potential park. This is the alleyway right here. This is the area, this darkened area is what is currently planted with those raised planter beds in the trees, and then this is all parking right behind it. This is zoomed back a little bit. The solid area now is the study area. And before getting into the design, I just wanted to address, because we would propose removing some of these parking spaces, we believe there can be some reconfiguration of the parking spaces up here, and that would lead to a net loss of about 4 to 5 spaces total, which it's always hard to lose spaces, but what you gain in the public park space I think potentially outweighs it. Again, here's another shot with the alleyway preserved. Interestingly enough, you actually lose more spaces by preserving the alleyway as opposed to closing it. So I'll go through the design options very quickly. We started, there's a whole lot of design work that went into this by Olin, and I can't capture that in 5 or 10 minutes here. But they did pull together some precedent images of different park spaces, and this is what they were trying to encapsulate in their designs. And you see this is a very small pocket park in New York City, just very simple movable chairs, trees, and a water feature at the back. Again, movable chairs here throughout in different examples. Here they're trying to capture the restaurant seating that we've also, we talked about quite a bit, trying to incorporate that into the design as well. Water features, things that might activate it for kids, families, and so forth. We certainly have our fill of them downtown, and I think it'd be a great thing to have something for kids or families to bring their kids to. And finally, we talked a lot about, artwork on the two walls that flank the space. So it may be, kind of tucked in this small area, but if you start to incorporate art into it, it certainly makes it feel a lot bigger and more interesting. So this is the first option that Olin presented. On the left-hand side, this is with the alleyway remaining in place. On the right-hand side, it's if you remove the alleyway. And so this was their very simple tree grove design, where it's a simple assortment of trees. The pink or the reddish tables are intended to be tables that would be used by restaurants that flank this space. And then the blue tables and chairs are intended to be movable tables and chairs that the public would use at all times. And so there was always that distinction between the two, so that you could have the best of both worlds. You could have the public use and enjoyment of it, but at the same time, the activation of restaurant seating. On the right-hand side, this park expands a little bit more to the left and incorporates restaurant seating more along where the restaurants would be located on both sides, and could be a more logical placement of those tables and chairs rather than bringing service to the middle, for example. Here's a very basic rendering of that space, just to give you a real simple idea of how that might look. Go to option 2. Again, on the left, the picture is where the alleyway stays in place, and on the right where it goes away, and there's some expanded seating area here. But in both designs, you see what they've created here is a really interesting mini park. You have a pergola with swings. These are supposed to be hanging swings. A couple of steps that could be seating elements, could be play elements for kids. Nice little green area for kids. Potential water feature here. Again, the blue movable tables and chairs for the public, and then dedicated seating for restaurant use. And where you give up the alleyway and you include that in the design, you can achieve more restaurant seating on this side as well as on this side here. Again, here's a rendering. If you're looking from Broad Street into the park space, you see that pergola and swings coming off of that, and potential water feature here. And then finally, option 3. This is a different take at creating a little lawn area, again, a little play area, seating that are steps, could be play elements for kids, seating for someone if there's maybe a small band or performing artist, and you have people that can sit in the lawn and watch this person or folks. Again, here if you include the alleyway into the design, you have opportunities, very good, generous opportunities for active restaurant seating on both sides, as well as plenty of room in the middle for the public to interact and really enjoy the space. Here's a potential water element, water jets, where the kids could play in it. And another rendering showing that particular design. And in each of these renderings, I hope you get the sense it's a simplistic design. We ask them to be very simple and come up with something affordable, yet something very usable and functional. So the movable tables and chairs, the spaces that are really opened up. There aren't any big barriers here, but it's places where you can relax if you're going to Little City Creamery and you want to get some ice cream for the kids and go sit and enjoy it. Here you have a space, whereas today you really don't have a very good space to do that. It's only about 10,000 square feet, which is nice because we don't think it's going to be that expensive to really do this, but at the same time, you can really do a lot with that kind of space. And so hopefully that's coming through these pictures. So the construction estimate is here. It's a little bit small, probably for you guys to read, but the punchline here is this is only for the hard costs, by the way. The hard costs were estimated about $350,000. If you add the alleyway, it was another $30,000 on top of that, so that got you to $380,000. And where we come up with $500,000 is you still need some money for soft costs, because you still have to do a final design. You have to hire a civil engineer and an architect to do construction documents that you would then bid out to a general contractor. And I'll just stop for a minute on this page. I think it's a pretty important page. The red area here is the area in question, and it really is strategic. It is ground zero to our downtown. And this is where the EDA, I think, is very passionate about it. We want to do something that's transformative in the downtown. We want to continue to see the downtown get better and better. We have Harris Teeter that'll come online shortly. We have another proposed project right here. We have a great restaurant space here where they just recently put a lot of improvements into the Broad Street facade. It's interesting. We heard some comments through the process. Well, people want to use this park because it's loud and there's traffic. Well, guess what? 4Ps just put all this sidewalk seating outside. It looks pretty successful to me, and I don't think it's detracted from, people wanting to go outside and actually enjoy the outdoor space. It's one of those things. I think if we build this park, I think people are going to use it a lot. People are just going to come because there's not a whole lot of other places to go in the downtown area to sit and relax and enjoy without actually having to buy dinner. So I think it's a very good focal point for all of these businesses. You have a ton of restaurants and shops along this strip. These are really our two main intersections in the city of Falls Church. You got Washington and Broad, and you have North Maple and Broad, and you have this confluence of some really, really cool businesses that I think could use some additional business. Who couldn't, right? Who would turn down the customers? I think they seem to be doing well now, but I think we need to keep investing in our downtown and making it a great place for people to go. And this is what we really would like to do. This little park space, again, is very small, but it could be, kind of the center of the bullseye for our downtown. And I think it's something that the city has within its control to do something with. We own the property, with the exception of the alleyway. So I for one, am hopeful that we can actually take this early preliminary design and really run with it and do some cool things with it. A couple of just final thoughts. Talk mostly about the plaza space and the design Olin came up with. If we really want to do an A+ job on this, I think we look beyond the Plaza Park a little bit and we think about how to connect this side of the street with this side of the street better, and we make this overall pedestrian experience better. And that's where, this idea of a mid-block crossing could be really, really transformative, I believe, as well, which is really something that it could dive right into the plaza space here, connect straight across. You have 4 Ps in the restaurant space here. You have this area that hopefully will redevelop at some point, and we'll have more businesses and a better sidewalk and better pedestrian space over here. This is a 500-foot block. It's pretty long, so having a mid-block crossing is actually pretty important, especially to kind of slow down traffic. People speeding through because it's 4 lanes. This would do wonders, actually, putting this median in here and making it more pedestrian friendly. Here's a very crude rendering of what that might look like. Here's the potential plaza space. If you had a nicely marked mid-block crossing, maybe you have a small median with some trees, and you have a very minor sidewalk improvement over here that we'd have to work with the landowner over here to do. But you could have a very strong connection in what is your, ground zero for your downtown, a very important space. So next steps, I'm here tonight to try to continue this conversation that we started in January. I'm hopeful that City Council will support putting a new plaza space in this city-owned land. I think it'll go a long way, again, to just continuing to push the revitalization of our downtown. One of the other next steps, obviously, if City Council were to support this, would be to really hand it off to staff and ask staff to manage the process for the most part going forward. That would require completing the park design. It would require, in some form or fashion, community input that staff and City Council and others, could determine. And we also do need to evaluate the alleyway with the private owner and see if we can get control of that alleyway, work something out with that person. And ultimately, once the design is completed, all those are completed, then you go and you bid and hopefully construct this. So we stand ready to assist City Council and staff in any way possible, and I do thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Novotny. We appreciate your fine presentation and all your good work on the EDA and your leadership and creative ideas. I think we probably all have a lot of questions, and so why don't we move on to that, and then we can get some comments as well. Mr. Baruch, did you have a question?
So I don't have questions, more comments. One, Mike, thanks for your leadership on the EDA and your perseverance in bringing this forward. I'm going to start without any sort of filters as far as this goes. I think Mike was perhaps being a little too diplomatic in his terms of the space. Now with a toddler and a 2-year-old, I frequent that area quite a bit because she loves certain establishments in that area. And I have to say, just walking through that area and being there with a little one, it's an eyesore. And frankly, I think as a city, we should be ashamed of ourselves that we've let that area kind of fall into unusable space that's not very inviting. And I think we've let our businesses down. And I say that with, again, not to name the establishment, going to an establishment that's thriving. It's a fairly new business in the city. And not really because they're doing so well, not having a place to sit and having to sort of navigate in what could be very usable space to kind of like, the instant reaction was ick, to put it mildly. So I think we've got a great opportunity here, and I think we should go for it. And I think there's other areas of improvement for the parks throughout the city, but I'm sort of seeing that through a different lens with a little one, and I just think that there's a lot of opportunities that we have in the city to do that. So I think this is low-hanging fruit. I think I've said that before. I think we should figure out a way of making it happen and not talk endlessly about it. On some of the details, I think if there's a way of incorporating the alley, that would make a lot of sense to do. So I'd be supportive of trying to incorporate the alley. I think it gives us some greater options, and I think sort of having an alleyway there by a park is not a great idea to begin with. Two, I think the other aspect of it that I think we need to think through is sort of having this be a gateway to hopefully what will become the, I think, planning staff has sort of looked at it as far as having the back alley kind of notion. I think having sort of a way of having that as an entranceway into what may develop in the future and retaining that, so that having that option maybe doesn't get built now, but it's something that's available, and whatever the design feature is we don't have to redo everything in order to make that design feature happen, because I'd like to still see that happening. And then finally, just on the public safety aspect of it, the same night that we were kind of having this ick thing, we dealt with the ick thing, and, you know, consumed whatever consumable goods we had that evening, and then we were looking out towards the other side of the street. And I can't tell you how many times we had to like close our daughter's eyes because people were crossing the street illegally from another establishment to try to visit other establishments on the other side. So I do think that we're going to have real serious traffic pedestrian issues there on Broad. So it's something that I was going to raise to Mr. Shields. I'm glad it kind of came up in this presentation tonight. We need to deal with that pretty soon. I mean, in the course of half an hour that we were there, I think we saw probably 2 or 3 groups of folks crossing on a busy evening in various states of affairs, let's just say, as you can imagine. Made for very, I was just like shocked, but very dangerous situation for pedestrian and cars. So I think it's something that we're going to have to address sooner than later, and it makes sense to have a crossing there. So I think that needs to be something that's thought through. And then 2, as far as funding, I think the EDA sort of, you know, ponying up dollars is very helpful. It's something that we may want to talk to adjacent landowners to figure out how we can put funding together. I should say it's not unprecedented in other localities where pocket parks or other park features are being put in with businesses contributing towards that in a variety of ways. It's happening in a lot of urban areas. I'm familiar with one in San Francisco, which I've talked to staff about. I think they're called parklets, and it's sort of taken off as far as how funding is done to maintain those or even build them. If the city dedicates land or puts in its share of working with local businesses. So there's a lot of ways of doing that in an innovative way, given sort of budget situations. So I think we should explore that. It's not unheard of. And there's good models of that throughout the country. So thank you. But I say we go for it.
Great, thank you. Other comments? Ms. Conley?
Just about the land right now, it is a park. Mr. Shields, is it under Parks and Rec right now? Or is it, what is that?
Well, it's not heavily maintained.
Right. So if it were to become heavily maintained and we added green space, would it then become a Parks and Rec facility?
Yeah, you know, it's not a park that's like any of the other parks that Rec and Parks currently maintains. And so if it were envisioned differently with, depending on what's happening there, I think we'd have to figure out who is the, you know, where's the best place for it to be taken care of.
One of the things we hear
Rec
is
and Parks should be the natural place, but it may, if it's mostly infrastructure, then it might be Public Works instead.
Okay. It struck me that one of the things that we hear is that the Rec and Parks Committee would love to be adding green space, and this would be green space that we would be adding as a park, and that would fit into their plan as well.
Ms. Oliver?
Mr. Shields, I would be interested in hearing Park and Rec's comments on the proposal. I also would be interested in hearing what the maintenance costs could be expected to be ongoing. We have talked about funding the upfront costs, but we need to be conscious of ongoing costs that might go into the budget. When we talk about this, because the pedestrian crossing comes up so frequently, do we have a ballpark figure for what a pedestrian crossing might cost to put in? That would just be useful to have. And then the last thing I just wondered about is the relative timeline of being able to implement something like this. Once it was in the CIP, is it 3 years out, 1 year out? And if the crossing was included, how long would that take? So before we talk about it again, those are my questions.
Right. So as this project, I think the way for this project to get traction is for it to go through the capital improvements program, and through that process, then the questions about maintenance and how it would function would be addressed at the conceptual level, and then as we go through the contracting, every step in the decision-making process, we'd be able to refine that more. In terms of the timing for it, we have a very large capital improvements program right now. We've got lots of projects in there, and we talked about our transportation projects just a moment ago. And so if this is a priority, and I think that's really the discussion here with the council is, and the decision doesn't have to be made tonight, but soon, to talk about where this fits in the context of the other projects that are already authorized and in their planning phases. And if this is a higher priority, then some of those get bumped out, or we figure out how to make those adjustments. But I think the first step is to get it in the track for the capital improvements program so it can be in the form for the council to actually direct how you want this to go in terms of its priority and scope.
Other questions or comments, Mr. Snyder?
Thanks a lot. Mike, thank you for your leadership on this. Your pictures really help illustrate, first of all, the underutilization of the space now and give us some pretty good ideas of how we can dramatically improve it. And I think there are really three elements. One is business support, and I think before we go too far down the road, we really need to partner with the businesses in the area to determine whether they think this is of value and are they willing, what role are they willing to play both in funding it and helping us design it so it best supports them. The second thing is a park amenity, and that's an issue, and it is true that in that area we could use something more like that. And then really the third issue, the crosswalk across Broad Street, that really complicates things a bit because we've got a Route 7 transit project that's gonna hopefully provide some additional transit, and you can't be putting medial strips in the middle if you're doing that. Now that doesn't mean that you can't put some sort of crosswalk there. So those are the three issues, and I think we need to move forward. I would be in favor of authorizing staff to get us more information, but I do want the partnership with the businesses to be done early, because I think the way this is going to work is if it's a true partnership moving forward. It's got to serve their needs, and hopefully they'll be willing to support the project in some way and help us design it appropriately. Mike, do you have any comments about any of those questions that I'm raising?
I mean, just on the crossing of the block, it's not necessarily, you know, it doesn't have to be done at the same time as the plaza. So if there's a different timeline to that, I think that works, you know, fine with this kind of project. On the funding, and I understand the concerns that are being raised on the funding. Hopefully the EDA's gesture in funding half of it is helping, and also I think we were all pleasantly surprised that the pricing did not come back astronomical. And so the one thing I would be worried about is continuing to delay this to try to get, I don't know how many different partnerships you would require first before moving forward. If the city can pull together the funding, I think it's absolutely, it would be a great and bold move by the city to invest in its own downtown and the infrastructure. So I'm not suggesting not partnering with the businesses. I guess what I'm suggesting is don't let that delay actually doing something really good in your downtown.
Okay, other comments? Mr. Duncan, do you have anything you wanted to say? You don't have to, okay. Mr. Baruch, second.
Yeah, so just a couple things that I wanted to follow up on just about the funding issues. Mr. Shields, how much is left from, I know that we dedicated some monies from the water sale towards enhancing the downtown area, and I know some of that money was used up for LED lighting, et cetera. How much of that is left, if any?
Well, it's all been programmed, and so the things it's been programmed for is for sidewalk improvements to go up to the State Theater and on the North Washington Street, for lighting improvements, for pedestrian improvements, to bring water bibs and types of infrastructure down to the street. Those are the types of projects that the $600,000 is being appropriated for. The most expensive chunk is the streetscape and the sidewalk and the lighting on North Washington.
So that all that money has been appropriated already? Yes. Okay. So just to kind of follow up on Mr. Snyder's point a little bit, again, I don't want to have this sort of, this is low-hanging fruit, and half the money is like dedicated. We're talking potentially $250K for a lot of bang for the buck. And if we just kind of do the same old, this will never happen. We've been talking about this for probably close to a year, at least when we first saw it. Is that about right, Mike? A little less than a year, but almost there. And I just think this is a unique opportunity because part of these plans also include dedicated seating for local businesses. So I think there's a way of leveraging some of the assets that the businesses and landowners may have to actually bring this to fruition, because they are going to be getting an amenity out of it. So I think we've got some very strong arguments to bring in the chamber, bring in other groups, and make this happen. And I'd love to be part of that, if that's what it takes to kind of get this moving. But I think that there's ways of doing this and partnering with the business community. And right now, we know we've gotten a commitment from a city quasi-entity with half the funds. we should be able to come up with the other, this is not the standard park. There are going to be amenities for businesses there, and I don't think it's a far stretch to say, hey, can you help with maintenance, et cetera, because you are getting dedicated seating out of it, which is going to help your, retailers or your businesses that are going to be thriving there as well. So I don't think it's a far ask. I mean, I'm sure that, Carol is going to have to look at it to make sure that we can do that type of partnership. So we'll have to run the legal traps. But assuming we can do that, I don't see why we can't move quickly on it, go through the boards and commissions process, but we shouldn't sort of spend too much time on it, because we're going to have, again, a time frame where, we're going to have major things coming online just across the street, and it'd be a shame to kind of not leverage all these exciting things happening. So that's where I'm at with it, and I'm happy to roll up my sleeves and try to do what we can to get the business community and others involved in this to make it happen if that's the will of the council.
Mr. Novotny?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to point out, there are some other good examples around this area of urban parks. It is kind of a different park. I mean, it's an interesting question, is it Parks and Recs? And I hadn't really considered that, because I've always thought of this as an urban plaza, not like, the traditional soccer field and so forth, which I think has a different maintenance cost and it's a whole different bag, I think. This is more of a hardscape urban plaza with some grass elements and so forth. But, when you look around the area, Vienna has a great urban park right at the confluence of Maple and the bike trail. Herndon has a great little public park in their downtown. Fairfax City just opened a brand new public park in their downtown. I don't know, it's probably a good question. I don't know how they funded those. I don't think they necessarily all funded by businesses. I could be wrong, or required partnerships. Maybe you could do some kind of like sponsorships, or ask for donations. You could have your park benches or bricks or so forth. With people that have donated to help fund some of this. I guess my point is, there are some great examples around the area. I think some other jurisdictions have really done this well. I'd love to see it happen here at Falls Church. This is a really special place. I think it'd be even better, with something like this. And I just hope we don't delay to get it done. I live on North Maple Avenue, and so I do walk to Little City Creamery with my kids. And I'll tell you, we cut through the parking lot, and it's kind of a disaster. So just going through there, it's pretty scary. Pushing a stroller and having another kid that's old enough to run around now a little bit. So I think this is the kind of thing in an urban setting with parking lots abounding everywhere. You really want to have something like this. It's not, it's not just for businesses and improvement, it's also for public safety too. So just some additional things to think about.
Okay, I've got a few comments. First off, as I mentioned earlier, I want to thank you for all your good work. I know this has been a passion of yours, and your passion for the city is evident. We really appreciate it. I think your private sector experience as well as a developer is really invaluable to have here in the city. I think this project has a lot to offer. We need to be investing in our downtown. I think there's just so much potential in that commercial corridor that we haven't unlocked yet, and we've got such great demographics and kids and just a lot of things that we could bring to bear to really create a vibrant downtown. So I think this can be a very nice piece of that. And we need to be supporting our businesses and our restaurants and the things that are already there, and I think this would help to do that. I think it does need a little bit more work in terms of, I'd like Mr. Shields to respond or follow up with us in short order with some of the questions and things that were raised today. And I don't know if there's been that outreach with the businesses yet, but I think there ought to be at least a minimum of discussion to find out whether neighboring restaurants would actually utilize the outdoor seating, and if so, under what circumstances, and just how all that might work. And but let's not let this dally, because we've spent a fair amount of time. I was at the EDA, I think in January, whenever it was, and it's been a long stretch since we've kind of come back to hear this. But if we can maybe put this back on council's plate in the very near future with some answers to some of these questions, maybe we can see if there's a consensus to move this forward and get more input from the community and from businesses and the different boards and commissions. But I'd like to hear back something in short order if we can, if that's the will of the council. Okay. All right, listen, thanks again for your great work.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, why don't we move on to the next item?
Well, the next item is somewhat of a similar vein, talking about capital projects, and we have for work session discussion tonight, contracts and agreements for architecture and facilities engineering services. And there's basically two pieces of work that we're trying to accomplish with this contract, with these sets of contracts. One is just in the course of maintaining our 11 odd buildings that the city takes care of, there are small issues that pop up all the time. How to deal with the fire code issue and do a redesign, how to deal with the police evidence locker. And so for small issues, it's efficient if we have a set of local architects who can help us on a task order basis to perform these small functions, design and engineering services. And then we have the larger projects, the library project, the city hall project, which would be much larger engagements. And we've gone through a selection process and an interview process to have two firms who could help us on a task order basis for those larger projects. And so what we're asking for council to do tonight is to authorize us to enter into agreements with those architects. But then when we have the major tasks that we're talking about, the library or city hall, those task orders would come back to council to really talk about the budget, the scope, talk about what kind of services these architectural firms could provide for us to help advance those projects. And so that's a quick overview. Mike Collins, our Director of Public Works, really oversaw this procurement. He is out to attend a funeral tonight, and so Cindy Mester and I are happy to speak to this and provide the staff report, but that's a quick overview. And Cindy, if there's anything to more details to add, and then we can answer any questions about it.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure we need, I don't know if anyone needs more details on the specifics. I mean, essentially you want to hire 4 different firms or engage 4 firms to do different tasks relating to this project. Is that right?
That's correct.
Of various sizes. Some are better suited for a small job. Some may be better suited for ADA compliance issues, et cetera. And so you've chosen 4 different firms to do this work.
That's correct.
Okay, Mr. Brew?
So did this go through a bidding process?
Yes.
A standard bidding process? Okay, so it went through the standard open bidding criteria, et cetera. So these are not sort of exclusive.
Correct. We did have a very extensive, and I served on the evaluation committee, and along with James Mack, Mike Collins, Mike Whitfield, who's our construction manager, and Doug Frazier. It was an open procurement. It called for the 2 group sizes, under 100, over 100, and the ability to mix and match based on criteria and scope to select the best firm for that specific project at the time. We did have 22 respondents, 16 for the large group 1 and 6 for the small.
Great.
We shortlisted, interviewed 4 for each group, and then narrowed down to the 4 before you this evening.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that it went through the open bidding process. And Carolyn, you've sort of blessed the process and the way that this went forward.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Connolly?
So the construction cost exceeding $100,000 firms, one of those 2 firms will be the firm that designs the library and city hall.
Correct. So we, while we were finishing up with the contract that just expired, which was Dewberry for City Hall Public Safety Task Force, we're finishing that process up. That contract expired. They did not rebid, so we, in that process, so we wanted to keep that going, so as soon as they finish, we can work and move City Hall forward with council's approved funding. We will then go back to them. We had both firms actually present on City Hall, assess what had been done, what was the task force, what were the goals, what was approved, what did you like, strengths and weaknesses, how would you approach it, so we can get a feel of how they reacted to those 2 projects. We also included library because they had the ability to look at the adopted CIP. And based on that, in particular on their City Hall presentation, we picked the two. Now, there'll still be one more competitive level, which would be detailed scope proposal negotiations with the two firms to select the final one, including engagement with the reactivated task force that Council did for the City Hall Public Safety. That's the task order contract that Mr. Shields referred to that we would actually bring back to Council, so you would have task force and staff input, as well as possibly the ability to meet the firm that would be doing our City Hall engagement. The same concept would hold with the library. I've had a conversation with the director and the library board that they have this option. We have two good firms. We'll be able to test it by the time we get to, they'd be known quantities. They know us by the time we get to City Hall. We can choose that. If the library board, after interviewing the two firms, felt uncomfortable, nothing would preclude going back out for procurement, but this is an efficient way to keep our projects going, be staff efficient and effective with our CIP on the facility side, similar to the work we've been talking to you all about with transportation.
Any other comments or questions, or should we move on to the next item?
So the request is that this would be on your agenda for your next meeting and on the consent calendar.
All right, thank you. Why don't we move on to the next item then?
So the next item is our year-end financial report for FY15, and we'd like to spend a little bit of time with council tonight, with about 15 minutes, to go through a PowerPoint presentation just to summarize the numbers and where we are fiscally as of June 30th, 2015, and then have a little discussion about what that means for the current fiscal year. One thing, FY16, one thing we would say is we're not going to present a lot of projections for the future years. In this presentation, this is really just a touching base on how things ended up with our last fiscal year. We have had a budget calendar discussion with the school board at the last meeting on Friday morning at the liaison group meeting, and we have tentatively scheduled our FY17 budget planning session with joint session with the school board on December 8th. But we will confirm that date, but that's when we will really be talking about our projections in FY17 going forward.
Happy Monday, Council. Would you like to do a stretch? Okay. I'll try to go through this pretty quickly. What we will cover with the FY15 year-end report and financial condition is where are we now, the FY15 revenue and expenditures, FY15 fund balance, the impacts on the FY16 projections, and a summary and planning takeaways. All right, here's your graphic of your results of operations. The line is the operating revenues, and the bar is split up into three colors, one for government, general government operating, school board or school division operating, and your debt service. As you can see, between the years 2010 through 2015, we had surpluses. We have eliminated those surpluses by aligning our tax year with our assessment. So those surpluses have gone away. For those that like numbers and spreadsheets, this is the same thing. All right, this is your budget to actual. We'll go into detail on the individual revenue items. Your real property tax was under budget by $182,000. Your local taxes were under by $183,780. Your other revenues were over. Now, just to clarify things, your local taxes, we projected them a lot higher. They grew year over year. And in your packet, you have the detailed line item revenues and the year over year differences. You will see that for the most part in the year over year, there was growth. We were very aggressive in our projections in FY15, so We did have some areas where we were slightly under what we projected, but overall, there was revenue growth year over year. In your other revenue category, that was primarily triggered by your permit fees for your new construction. On the expenditure side, your expenditures came in $714,000 under budget. That $35 million actual number includes encumbrances, which is not the way we would ordinarily present it, and you will see in your detailed sheet that we do have a separate column for encumbrances. The general fund balance, this is the breakdown. Your general fund balance total is $31 million. It's broken down into the unassigned category, which represents, as you see in the graph, 18.5% of your FY15 expenditures and 17.6% of your FY16 expenditures. That's the item that's of most importance to council, at least from our standpoint. You have building fees of, all right, that's $611,000. Those are your reserves. As you recall, we did a budget amendment to move excess permit fees into a fund so that we could pay for future inspections. You also have money that's assigned for water sale expenses. There's still curb cuts and other matters that we had to set aside money for. We have money that's committed for capital, and that's in your CIP. You also, and that's water proceeds. You also have other committed capital from our capital reserves. That was from the sale of property last year and the year before. You have money that's committed to the FY16 budget. You have restricted grants and bond proceeds, and of course you have the encumbrances. This is a graph of your unassigned fund balance, and what it shows, again, is your line for your 12%, a line for your 17%, and the bar shows approximately where we are at this point in time. Your results of operations. As you can see, we had our economic downturn between 2007 and 2009. We started going up in 2010. We peaked in 2012, and now we are stabilizing. Now, we use this chart to sort of guide us in terms of where we've been and what our future projections are. As you can see, we had budgeted very conservatively between 2011 and 2014, and our actuals exceeded the budget. We have, again, been a little more aggressive in our projections, and we've looked at your FY15 actuals and compared them to the FY16 projections. We are hoping to achieve 6.6% growth in personal property to meet that revenue target for FY16. Sales tax, same thing. We're projecting a growth of 3.7% to reach our target. And again, all along you'll see what we've done is we've tried to shorten the gap between what we're projecting and what our actual budget is. Meals tax, we're going to require 3.3% growth in FY16. And again, we think for the most part these numbers are achievable, and we will use this to guide our projections to FY17. BPOL, because of the construction activity, we are going to probably look to be more aggressive in our projections for that because the actuals are still exceeding the budget. Other taxes, we made some adjustments in FY16 because we were concerned about recordation taxes, and we decreased our projections. We expect that we will reach that target and probably exceed it, and that will help us in projecting for FY17. All right, here's a comparison of that same graph in numbers. Expenditure trends. Our personnel expenses are the blue line. The bar is our total expenses. We're running about 58% in terms of our personnel expenses as it relates to our total operating. Again, your salary and benefit trends are here. You have your total salaries, your retirement, your health and OPEB, and your other benefits. Right, expenditure trends between general government and the school division. Between 2011 and 2013, had larger school expenditures. From 15 and 16, I'm sorry, stay all the way around. General government was larger between 11 and 13. The school budget now is growing. All right, key updates. We can take a look at our pension results. We do have our actuarial report. Our actual value of assets, the funding ratio is up from 92.2% to 97.9% for basic. Police is 87.8 to 93.2. The market value is up significantly. We're up over 100% for both basic and police. And what that translates into is that our contributions are down from 12.9 to 7.7 for basic, 29.5 to 23.4 for police, and that should result in cost savings of $600,000 for the general fund alone. We do not have the school figures at this time. Our capital reserves. We have $1.6 million from the sale of land. We've allocated in our CIP $1 million for your big chimney and transportation, and $643,000 for facilities maintenance. From the water sale proceeds, we have a total of $9.3 million. 3.4 is set aside for parking, and at this point in time, 5.9 million is not allocated. Voluntary concessions for school capital costs. We have received developer payments from the Northgate project. We expect to receive $2 million in the spring of FY16 for the West Broad Street, and for Lincoln at Tinner Hill, that's FY17. These are all earmarked for the Mount Daniel project. Here's our outstanding tax-supported debt. It totals a little bit more than $54 million. $40 million is for schools, $14 million for general government. Breakdown of the school debt by facility. You have 10.7 for Mount Daniel. There's 13 million for the
George Mason High School.
The George Mason High School. You have almost 2 million for Thackeray. Have $1 million for, no, that's the Mount Daniel. Yeah, there's 2 Mount Daniels.
And that's right. There's
yeah,
Mount Daniel classrooms back in 2006.
Then you have Mary Ellen Henderson. All right. We are contemplating a FY16 budget amendment, and that'll be a future discussion at a work session. Some of the things that we would like to discuss will be carry forwards and some budget items for discussion. Among them are building fees, placing the surplus building fees from FY15 into the reserve. The reserve currently has $611,000 in it. Set aside FY15 funds for transportation projects. We do anticipate that our WMATA cost will exceed what we have budgeted, so we will need some funding for that. There has been discussion about an environmental program coordinator. That's up for consideration. FCCTV will be moved to school administration, and we'll need to budget local funding to support in a separate community services fund. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I imagine we do have a few questions. Why don't we turn the lights back up, and maybe we'll start with Mr. Baruch.
Since I don't necessarily believe in just questions, but I mix them up with comments, can we just go back to one of the slides, Richard? It was the trend line that I think your takeaway line was, we're stabilizing. And that showed, I think it was the surplus deficit slide. It's a line graph. Right there, thank you. So if we can just pause and look at that for a minute. So as far as this fiscal year 2015, which we're looking at now that we've got all the info in. So looking at one of the slides, you showed if you just do straight expenditures over revenue, about $1 million.
Yes.
Of a deficit, so it was a bracketed number. So if you take that, there's certain assumptions that are built into that. So if you pull out underspending that was done to close some of that, and you take out fund balance, what does that leave you at? Roughly.
About 1.5 million.
Okay. So how are we saying that we stabilized?
All right, in terms of...
No, I mean, that was a non sequitur.
Okay.
So I want to pause. So we used one-time fund balance for ongoing operating expenses. Okay? We talked about, and I don't want to relitigate this all over again, of how that causes issues, because now we're in a hole. And we underspent, which meant programs that needed to get done didn't get done. And we're saying we stabilized because now we're hitting zero. I don't think that's, with all due respect, I don't think that captures the whole gamut unless we talk about what happens to fund balance and we move forward. So I think it shows that, yeah, we're at zero, but doesn't fully discuss, well, here are the programming and underspending that didn't happen and what they mean to reality, to our taxpayers and our business community. So I think that's really important to think about as we, especially, and these numbers are like great in a vacuum, but they mean something for next year and what we're going to have to do with the budget, because that underspending is stuff that we said go do, capture, and fulfill, and because of where we're at with the budget to close this gap, they didn't happen. But they may have to happen in a future year. And then we put pressure on the system because we used fund balance. So yeah, we've stabilized, but there are some dramatic measures and some things that are potentially happening in the real sort of outside this budget wonk discussion that have consequences for next year. So I think we need to talk about those at some future time. But the notion that we've stabilized, in one sense we have, but we have potential pain coming in the next year, which is for a future meeting. But this notion that we've sort of stabilized and everything is great when we look at, well, we just used fund balance to get there and we underspent, and the true, you know, deficit is north of $1 million. It's a big deal. And I don't want to just sort of go through these numbers given the late hour and that we're in a work session and kind of gloss over that and, oh, we're on glide path. Because I don't think that's the reality. So.
We will cover...
Sorry, happy Monday.
That's fine. We're going to cover this again as we go forward and we prepare for the 17 budget. So it's not a dead issue. What we are telling you here is that we did allocate fund balance to balance this budget. We did not use all of it, but nevertheless, your expenditures did exceed your revenue if you pull out the fund balance that was used. You're absolutely correct.
The key takeaway for me is, well, we're in a deficit north of $1 million when you look at sort of the real deficit.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. So the narrative that I hear you relating to us through these numbers is first that revenues are up 4.7%. We'd projected they'd be a little more than that, but that's a pretty solid number, 4.7%, reflecting, you know, overall economic circumstances here in the city, plus a fairly aggressive effort to, you know, grow our local economy, as evidenced by ribbon cuttings and grand openings and so forth. Because at some point, fairly early in the fiscal year, we anticipated that the national economy might be flattening out. Sometime in October, we began to tighten our belt, and on the expenditure side, we came in 1% under what you'd projected, which I think is commendable. I'm sure there were some things that we would have liked to have done, but I'm not sure there's anything that was so pressing that it could not go in the category of, you know, we better be careful and we better spend a little more prudently than we thought we might. So that's why we came in 1% under expenditures. The pension funds speak for themselves, very strong, probably the strongest pension fund anywhere. The capital reserves, as you mentioned, boosted by the water sale, of course, but that's legitimate or strong. The unassigned fund balance is at 18.5% of FY15 or 17.6 of FY16, which is still above the peak of our policy goal of 17%. The range is 12 to 17, and we are still above 17. Just off the top of your head, can you tell me the dollar difference between 17% and 18.5%?
It's close to $500,000.
Okay, so about $500,000 above the peak policy.
And that's why there was a slide that talked about budget amendments and discussions about carry forwards.
Understood, which we'll pick up later. So I'm just trying to, you know, sum up the numbers that you presented us in that sort of form. I just think it's important for people to understand that because this council, which does not always agree on these tough budget and fiscal issues. I mean, this is the fourth time through for me to receive one of these reports because I got one of my very first meetings in 12, 13, 14, 15. And, you know, we always have at it, but I think it's important for the community to understand that we are making good progress, I think, in laying a foundation for taking on some of the challenges that we do face going ahead. So just briefly moving to that, on transportation, is it possible that as we look at how to deal with budget amendments and maybe budget for next year that we might be able to discuss putting a little more emphasis on projects like the project at Parker and Kent Street, neighborhood traffic calming? As I speak to people, I hear a good bit about concern about neighborhood traffic issues. And so I'm just suggesting that at least I would like to see us step that up to the degree that we can, the degree that we have budget space to do it. You know, the Parker and Kent thing has been being talked about, I think, for about 3 years because it was discussed right when I came onto council, and we began construction today, and that's great. But the pace of things, which others have referred to on other projects, I'm going to lobby for neighborhood traffic control to be one thing that we invest in, transportation projects of that nature. Do you have any initial thinking on that?
Council has approved in this current CIP additional funding, and staff projects that will help us handle the current projects in the queue. What's really critical would be the discussion of continuing the funding for the staff, because our new transportation planner is what's allowing us to have 2 active projects right now and starting the next one.
Okay, great. Good progress. Then finally and lastly, the only chart that I think it would be helpful, and you've had it before, is the tax history, the property tax rate history, which is something that a lot of people in town are talking about now, naturally, since it's an election. And, you know, the sort of general notion that I have is that, you know, we had a property tax rate and then the Great Recession came and, you know, assessments went down because values of our homes went down. We increased the property tax rate to just stay level, basically, at the amount of money that we were coming in. And then assessments started to go back up again. And the property tax rate did not go down to keep pace with the expectations that had been created in earlier years. And, you know, we don't need to discuss whether those expectations were right or wrong, but they were what people were to some degree used to. And so I just think it would be helpful to understand what that progression was, what year did we decide to make the decision, and basically begin to accumulate money in the unassigned fund balance for future needs. Then we began to change over the last couple of 3 years to a posture where we are now, which is, as you've said, a fund balance that's closer to policy, it's still above policy, and a tax rate that, you know, generally here over the last couple of years, the council has, the majority of the council has been, you know, at or pretty near the tax rate that we're at now. Again, the point of that is just to establish an expectation in people's minds as we go forward and tackle other challenges of, you know, where we're starting. Are we starting at a position of weakness, or are we starting at a pretty stable position and then going to be talking about meeting new expenditure demands with whatever tax rate might be required to handle those? So just a chart that would show, you know, the tax rate and the assessments and what the history of that is would be helpful.
We have our joint meeting and we do our 17 forecast. You'll have it.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, briefly, you've already had one turn.
Well, I just had a follow-up question. I think Mr. Duncan raises a good point about traffic calming issues. I mean, certainly we've all gotten a flurry of activity about that, and it's always a hot-button issue. How did we fund some of the traffic calming? I know that we allocated money for it. From what I recall, it was one-time money. Is that right?
That is correct. It was for FY17 only.
Okay, so
water sale
yeah,
proceeds.
I just needed a check of my memory, because I distinctly remember let's just say, threw a Baruch fit over it. Mr. Duncan, if you recall, specifically saying that that was not sustainable, that we had to figure out monies to program for that ongoing year in and year out. And I thought it was really disingenuous in some ways to say we're going to take one-time money knowing that we're going to need to do this next year. So we do it one year. How are we going to continue doing this knowing that it's an ongoing problem? So, Mr. Duncan, I'm refreshed to see you raise this, but you've got sort of a problem moving forward because you have no funding mechanism for it unless you figure out how you're going to pay for it, because you did it with one-time money before. Not one that I supported, but a majority did. So there you have it. But we know it's a huge problem, and we're going to have to figure it out. But you know, just want to be on the record again. I think it's important to take stock of history and where people voted. I certainly did not support one-time use of money to do that, and I was looking for ways of making sure that that was a sustainable source, knowing that we've got projects coming online, knowing that it's already an issue, one that's already has a lot of pressure installed in it. So I'm glad that it's catching traction as people are knocking on doors, but again, I'll be looking for ways of how is that sustainable long-term and figuring out funding sources that are sustainable. And one-time money isn't going to do it.
Okay. It looks like you want to respond, Mr. Duncan.
It sounds to me like without even looking at you, you don't want me to.
Look, if you want to, you'll have the last word, but that's about it.
No,
Unless
no,
someone
that's fine. That's fine. I support an effort to address these problems in a sustainable way, and that's, that includes generating new revenues and restraining spending, and I think we're on a good path to do that, and I'm pleased to hear what Ms. Mester said about our progress forward.
CIP process, which staff is starting now, so this is a helpful discussion, and we'll be going to the Planning Commission in February, will be very important for all of the issues you're talking about in terms of capital investment, and new projects are continuing.
And can I just say, one thing at the upcoming discussion where we talk about the FY16 budget amendments, there are certain things that we believe we need to do, and so we would like to bring that ordinance to you. There's also some room to maneuver based on these numbers for the council to consider priorities for the current fiscal year with one-time money. And I want to just state in a very serious way that the underspending in the budget really does reflect your department directors, who are very dedicated to providing the highest value possible with the least amount of money, and they're very careful stewards of the money that is allocated to them by the council through the budget process. And so that track record is again this year in FY15, and because of that we have a little bit of room to maneuver for that discussion at 16.
Great. Okay, well, why don't we make that the last word for this particular item, unless there's any other pressing comments that need to be made. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. And Ms. McCroskey, I think you're up next. The next item.
Yes, the next item before you is a recommended policy that would allow city council members to participate through electronic means from remote locations in meetings. Now, the policy, this is all essentially tracks what state code permits, and state code requires that you adopt this policy before you engage in this type of electronic participation. There's two different types of circumstances. One is for emergencies and personal matters, so it's a very broad category and allows one to do electronic participation for many different reasons. And the second one is for due to a temporary medical condition or a permanent disability. In either case, there must be a quorum of city council present at the main meeting location. City council has to approve at its meeting the electronic participation in each situation, and there have to be arrangements made to permit the people in the room with the city council to hear everything that's being said by the remote participant. Also, in the case of the personal matters, the broad category, it's limited to electronic participation in 2 meetings each calendar year. So that is, each member of city council would have the option to use this, but only twice in a calendar year. And in addition, when it's the personal matters, there has to be a disclosure in the meeting minutes of what the nature of the reason is for the remote participation. In the case of medical needs and disability, the record only needs to reflect that it was due to medical needs or disabilities in general, and there is not a limit on the number of times you can participate. So this would simply be a policy that you would adopt, and then as the need arose, members of city council would be able to participate through electronic means from remote locations. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Let me ask one to start, then I'll pass it on to others. You say we only have to adopt this as a policy, so state code doesn't require this to be anything more than, quote, a policy?
That's correct. It's just a policy has to be adopted for that would meet the requirements of the state code.
And the policy, quote, that you're suggesting we adopt, has that been the actual language of that been adopted by the localities? Where did it come from?
I drafted this language. Similar language has been adopted by the school board, by Actually, the FOIA councils was one that I looked at, but I simply tried to take the requirements of the code and outline them in a way that would be understandable and somewhat systematic. So there's not specific language out there.
Not a model policy.
But many jurisdictions have adopted these policies, and I looked at a number of them in preparing this.
Okay, questions, Mr. Brewer?
Just a question first. On line 101, I just want to make sure I understand this. It talks about, and this is on the personal emergency or personal matter, on or before the day of the meeting. So the code does the code say anything as far as how many hours before the meeting or anything like that?
No, actually, I think that the language just is, this is exactly what comes out of the state code, that you have to notify them on or before the day of the meeting. So it's really, I think, simply a matter of contacting the mayor and stating the nature of the emergency or personal matter, because that is also, if you see an F, has to be reflected in the minutes of the meeting.
And then there's no parallel to that for the medical piece.
That's correct, because the specific nature of the medical reason doesn't have to be stated.
No. I'm talking about the notification. Or did I miss that?
Oh, no.
There's no sort of parallel.
No, that's right. There's not a notice requirement, although in order to set it up, someone would have to be advised, like the clerk or somebody. But there isn't, that requirement doesn't exist in the code.
Okay. We may just want to keep it parallel, because there's clearly somebody
You
needs to be
could do that
notified.
if you wanted to add such a requirement. We can certainly easily put that in.
Because, I mean, that's going to have to happen anyways.
That's correct.
For the technology.
Well, someone
to be
would
there.
have to be notified. They could notify the clerk, but I think we could, it probably wouldn't be difficult. You'd be talking anyway to the mayor or someone, so it probably wouldn't be difficult to just make it the same. And that's easy to do.
And then two, I think just as a policy issue that we may want to just be very clear on, and I think this goes a lot to transparency issues. I just think that I know that we do very detailed minutes, et cetera, that we've talked about, but if there's a way of just capturing, whoever the council member is that's not present, that we indicate that the minutes, as I'm sure that they would reflect whatever that member says. If we can just kind of highlight perhaps that notion that we're trying to, the normal transparency, good government that the city does sort of applies in this context with equal force.
In other words, so that person's participation in the meeting is equally reflected in the minutes.
Exactly.
I think
they're not getting short shrift because they're participating electronically, that they're going to get the same, the public is going to be able to see that, hear that, however that happens, whether it's Granicus, meetings, et cetera. If we can just kind of capture that notion.
And effectively, they're attending the meeting just as if they're sitting there, so they would, there's no reason to treat them any differently.
And my understanding is we'd be using sort of the system to record them as well, so they would be on the recording that was used then to prepare the minutes.
Okay, other comments or questions? Excuse me? Okay.
My question is just about the technology. What technology do we have to do this? How would it work?
Thank you. They're going to speak. The microphone would need to be near the Polycon to pick it up. The Polycon would be good hearing, and we got the speakers, so that would work. As long as the mic picks it up, it'll go to Granicus. The person who's absent would probably want to have internet access so they could look at the documents on Granicus and follow along. I think we could work off the technology. There's some minor logistical stuff. This room's easier than Dogwood, but we can make it work.
Great. Could Mr. Duncan?
Could I just ask about the numbers? So this applies both to work sessions and council meetings. So in a typical year, we would meet 22 times for full meetings and say about 22, give or take. So 44 meetings. So this says participation is permitted in up to 2 meetings?
That's correct.
Or no more than 25, but 25% of meetings
Whichever
would
is
be like,
fewer.
that would be like 11 meetings. I mean,
That's right,
how
but
come
it's-
the big gap between 2 and 11?
Well, I think that the 25% is only there if you were a member of a body that met twice a year, then you would have the opportunity to use it twice. But, no, I'm sorry.
No.
No, because it's whichever is,
Wouldn't want it. That would be,
whichever's,
whichever's less. I mean,
Fewer,
I guess what
yes.
I'm trying to get at
Well-
is why wouldn't we have a number that would allow like 5 or 6 since
because the code only allows you to participate twice in a calendar year.
that's what I'm asking. So why does what is our legislative package next time need to say, you know, that's not really much of an accommodation because 2 is just 2. I mean, we meet 44
Right.
times a year. I mean, people here are particularly busy and travel a lot, and I don't know. Am I asking a question that seems out of bounds, or?
Well, the state code isn't going to allow you to participate more than twice for personal reasons by electronic means. It is going to allow you to participate more if it's a medical reason.
There's no restrictions if there's a medical
That's
reason.
correct.
I guess I just don't, why the 25% number? If they really don't want you to participate more than 2, why do they even throw in 25%, which gives the idea, I might be able to use it 3 times over the course of a year's worth of 45 meetings. That doesn't sound like that many meetings. I mean, it doesn't sound like that many misses.
But it is only whichever's fewer, but it doesn't make it.
It's more than 0, so that's what.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Well,
I don't mean to belabor it.
It's also for all public bodies. It's not just for council meetings, so that there are entities that would have many fewer meetings.
So in other words, we're making some progress, but Richmond is still pretty conservative on this.
I think that's correct.
Okay.
We're
Any
trying
other-
to take advantage of as much as we
What's
can.
that?
Do we have a video capability for the remote participant? Can we use technology to do that?
We don't have two-way video standard, but we could work with GoToMeeting or WebEx and do it. I'm not sure we can integrate it into the TV equipment. I'd have to explore that, but you could definitely have video. It just might be to the laptop. I'd have to test full projection.
Okay, last word maybe.
And Carol, we're only adopting for the city council meetings, correct?
That's correct.
But the code allows any boarding commission, for example, to adopt.
Correct. Any public body.
And this is some of this is fairly new as far as the state enabling statute, correct?
That's correct.
Can we, since we may adopt this, and even if we don't adopt it, can we just at least make sure that through the appropriate city staff that the boards and commissions know that they have this option?
Yes.
Thank you.
We would, I think the one thing we would want to do is check with each of the boards and commissions just to make sure that they're meeting in locations where they would have the capability to do this.
Of course, but I mean, they should have the option to do
yes,
this.
They could certainly have a policy in place.
So choose.
Okay, anything else? Mr. Snyder?
Just a quick question. Personal matter would include being out of town on a day job related business.
Yes,
travel,
I believe it would.
right?
I think it's a pretty broad category that would cover almost anything. It would include, I don't think it would restrict you participating from a vacation or something like that. That also would be a personal matter.
It's usable. I just wanted to clarify that under personal matter, it could include you're away on business travel in another country or another city, and you'd be able to call in and participate in meetings that you now can't.
Correct.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, great. Is there a consensus to go ahead and adopt this policy?
Do you have to have a note from your doctor on the medical stuff? Did I miss that?
I'll write you one, Phil.
No, I'm just,
All right.
No, it doesn't, no,
I mean,
there's
let's say
nothing
somebody,
that makes
wakes
that
up with
requirement,
the
but-
flu and they don't want to come because they don't want to make everybody sick. That's a temporary condition.
Correct.
You'll be okay in 48 hours and you probably won't even go to the doctor. I mean, how's that enforced?
I think that that's something that you all as a body would enforce to the extent that you had to vote each time to approve it.
Good, okay.
And you could possibly, if you didn't believe somebody
Yeah.
and didn't want to approve it
So
under
if
that
I don't
rule-
believe Tartar's back's hurting, then I don't have to
That's-
let him participate. Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay, anything else? So, Carol, to adopt this policy, does this need to be done at a regular meeting, or can we adopt it tonight at a work session?
Well, I think normally you take your votes at a regular meeting.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and
I'm
save
not
this
sure
for
that's
next week then.
Absolutely required, but yes, I think that's the process we were planning on, is we'll bring it back next week.
Sounds
And
good.
we'll add, is it the sense of the board that we should add the notion of notifying the mayor and keep that parallel for both categories?
Sure, if people want to do that. Okay,
Yeah,
yep.
I think it's not going to really be a big imposition.
Okay, great. So we've got a consensus on that.
Okay.
Fantastic. I think that is it, other than scheduling issues or council comments. Are there any council comments or scheduling issues that weren't discussed previously?
I had no schedule in my packet.
Oh, you didn't? Okay. Yeah, I didn't either. So,
I can put it up on the wall real quick if you want to have just
Yeah,
a quick discussion
sorry.
of it. There's a couple of things that we did want to note, and one is that there's discussion about on October 5th having, oh wait, yeah, thank you, Cindy. I was doing it on my computer and it's not hooked up. So the VML conference, we will meet on that Monday night. We will not defer that meeting to Wednesday. That was discussed. So we will stay on our normal Monday night for October 5th. Our plan is to have a walking tour potentially for the West Broad Area Plan potentially, but we were going to discuss the logistics of that at the mayor's meeting on Wednesday morning. The other thing we would note on the agenda going forward, if you scroll down to the November timeframe, and I've handed out to everybody the budget calendar that was discussed with the liaison group on Friday morning of the school board and the city council, and a couple of dates to think about. On November 16th, we would have a closed session to discuss the proposals that have come in for the campus RFP. That would not be an in-depth look at the proposals, but rather just an overview of them and a discussion of the process. Then on December 8th, we would plan to have a detailed review of those projects, of the proposals, and we would then also have an open session to talk about the CIP and FY17 budget planning. So that 8th is a really loaded night to discuss both of those things. We would keep the financial planning piece of it then by necessity much shorter than what we're used to and really focus on a review of the proposals. We also have 2 Saturday town hall meetings just to talk with the public about the RFP process, and we'll have to talk with our attorneys about what we can say publicly, but we're going to say as much publicly as we're legally allowed to. So we're planning to have 2 town hall meetings, one on December 5th and then the other on December 12th. And then on December 14th, which is your last meeting of the year, that is where council would, at least scheduled, to shortlist the proposals, authorize the issuance of the detailed RFP for the campus, and also Mason Row is tentatively on the 14th for that meeting as well. So that also is a big night. But these are the things we're kind of wrestling with in the mayor's meeting to just sort of think about this fall and the work that is coming down the pike. And so those are those are some intense things that are on the agenda that we're looking forward to.
Are there any council comments we didn't hear earlier? If, what?
Scheduling now.
Okay.
Just a reminder, EDC meeting this Thursday.
That's correct, 7:30, and it'll be in Dogwood. That's correct.
And we've got a tentative.
The fourth Thursday of the month.
Yeah. And Wyatt, if you can send out the agenda.
Yeah.
I know it's an ambitious agenda,
It is.
so we're going to have to work quickly through the agenda.
Okay.
So if you can get that around to.
Bring pizza.
Ah.
So if you can get that out to.
Okay, we'll do that.
And post it publicly or.
Yeah, it's
whatever
been
we do.
posted publicly, but.
I'm talking about the agenda.
Yeah, okay.
Make sure the agenda goes out.
All right.
Okay, anything else, or should we wrap up moments before 10 o'clock? Is there a motion to adjournment? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions? We are adjourned. Thanks everyone for staying. We appreciate the public sticking with us to the end. So anyway, thank you all.